The days slipped into weeks, and the cabin no longer felt empty. The two girls filled the silence with small laughter, soft voices, and the sound of footsteps moving across the wooden floor. The old man found himself watching them with quiet wonder. They learned quickly, picking up his language little by little, turning broken words into small sentences. Sometimes they asked questions about fire, about tools, about the strange things humans did. And he answered patiently, though he often wondered how much they truly understood. But at night, when the storms outside howled like wild beasts, their voices carried secrets. The girls would curl together under the blanket, whispering in their alien tongue. Their words were soft but urgent, and sometimes their glowing eyes shimmered with fear as they spoke. The man could not understand their language, yet the tone of their whispers filled him with unease. It was not the whispers of children telling stories. It was the whispers of survivors remembering what they had escaped. One evening, he rose from his chair to add wood to the fire. And as he passed their corner, he caught a single word in their speech. It was sharp, different, a word they had once used with him. Hunters. The younger girl shivered when the older one spoke it, and she buried her face into her sister's chest. The man paused, his hands tightening around the log, his breath heavy. So it was true. There was someone out there, someone searching for them. The next morning, he found the older girl sitting near the doorway, staring into the snow. Her face was thoughtful, too serious for someone so young. He sat beside her, handing her a small piece of bread. Hunters, he said softly, repeating the word he had heard. Her glowing eyes widened for a moment, then narrowed. She looked away, as if deciding whether to speak. Finally, in a halting voice, she whispered, "Yes, hunters." He waited, letting the silence sit between them. Slowly she spoke again, her words broken but clear enough. "They chase us. They want us. Not safe." Her voice shook, but her gaze hardened. And for the first time, he saw the fire in her eyes. She was no ordinary child. She was carrying a burden far greater than her small frame should bear. The younger one came closer, clutching her sister's arm, her eyes wide and afraid. She whispered quickly in their tongue. Too fast for him to catch, the older one hushed her, pressing a hand to her hair, then looked at the man again. "Family." "Gone," she said softly, her voice breaking. "Only us. We run, always run." The old man felt a heavy weight settle in his chest. He had suspected they were orphans, but to hear it confirmed with such raw pain made the truth sharper. He nodded slowly, placing a rough hand on her shoulder. "You're safe here," he said, his voice quiet but steady. The girl looked at him for a long moment, as if testing his words, then gave a small nod. That night, as the fire burned low, the whispers came again, but this time he did not try to ignore them. He sat awake, listening as their strange voices carried through the cabin, though he could not understand their language. He caught the tone, the rhythm, the sorrow. It was the sound of memories too painful to silence. And then something changed. The older girl began to hum, a soft melody that flowed like a river. The younger one joined, her voice higher, fragile but beautiful. Together, they sang a song in their tongue, low and haunting. The man closed his eyes, letting the sound wash over him. It was not human music, yet it carried the same weight: loss, hope, and longing. It spoke of stars, of journeys, of battles and broken families. It spoke of fear, but also of survival. For the first time, the man realized that these children carried more than hunger and scars. They carried stories, histories, lives that stretched beyond his small cabin and the frozen land around it. They were part of something bigger, something that had chased them across worlds, and somehow, fate had placed them at his door. As the song faded, the younger one fell asleep, her head resting against her sister. The older one stayed awake, her glowing eyes fixed on the fire. She spoke softly, almost to herself, but he heard it clearly. 10 years, she whispered. "We will not forget, never forget." The man frowned at her words, not sure what they meant, but before he could ask, her eyes closed, and she drifted into sleep. He sat there long after, the firelight flickering across his face, his thoughts heavy. What had he taken into his home? What danger followed these two fragile children who carried songs of sorrow and words of hunters? And most of all, what future awaited them all if the hunters ever found this place? The cold night stretched on, but his mind was restless. The whispers of the past had become louder, clearer, and they would not leave him now. For he knew, deep inside, that the story of these girls was far from over, and the echoes of their past would one day reach his door in ways he could not yet imagine. The morning came slowly, with pale light shining through the cracks of the wooden cabin. The old man opened his eyes to the faint sound of breathing, steady and calm. For a moment he thought he was dreaming, because for so many years his mornings had been filled with silence, only the crack of the fire and the wind outside to greet him. But now, when he turned his head, he saw the two alien girls curled together under the old blanket, their silver hair spread like shimmering threads, their small hands holding tightly to each other, as if afraid the world might take them apart. He sat up quietly, his bones stiff from years of work and the cold. For a long moment he simply watched them, and something stirred inside his chest. He had not expected them to survive the night so peacefully, but here they were, breathing softly, alive and safe. When the smell of bread filled the room, the younger one stirred first. Blinking her large glowing eyes, she sat up slowly, confused, as if unsure if she was still in a dream. The older one soon followed, rubbing her eyes, then glancing at him. With cautious curiosity, the man slid two small pieces of bread across the table toward them, and their eyes lit up instantly. "Eat," he said simply, and once again they did. Carefully but with eagerness, as they ate, he studied them more closely. Their clothes were torn and thin, made from some material he did not recognize. Their hands were small, their fingers delicate, but scratched and marked from hardship. They looked fragile, yet there was a quiet strength in the way the older one kept glancing around the cabin, protecting the younger one with her eyes. Even in hunger, even in weakness, she acted like a shield. The man broke the silence, his voice rough. "From disuse, where are you from?" he asked. The girls looked at each other, whispering in a tongue he could not understand. Then the older one turned to him and spoke, her voice soft, her accent heavy. "Lost," she said. "We are lost." That was all, nothing more. The man did not push them, for he could see the fear behind their glowing eyes. Instead, he sighed and stood, placing more wood into the fire. "Then you can stay," he said quietly, almost surprising himself. With the words, days passed, and the cabin was no longer filled with silence. The girls stayed close together at first, moving carefully, watching his every move. But slowly, they began to trust him. The younger one laughed when he showed her how to warm her hands by the fire. The older one watched closely when he taught them how to slice bread with care. They did not speak much, but when they did, it was enough. Small words, broken phrases, soft voices that filled the air with something he had not felt in years' life. At night, when the storm howled outside, the girls sang softly to each other in their strange tongue. The songs were haunting but beautiful, like echoes from another world. The man would sit by the fire, pretending not to listen, but his heart would feel strangely lighter when their voices carried through the cabin. One evening, as the fire crackled low, he noticed scars on the older girl's arm, deep, jagged lines that looked like they had come from claws or weapons. He frowned but said nothing. It was clear they had run from something or someone, and though they never spoke of it, he could feel the shadow of danger that hung over them. Still, the bond between them grew stronger. The girls began helping with chores, carrying wood, fetching water, cleaning the table. They laughed more now, their pale cheeks showing a faint glow when they smiled. And for the first time in years, the man felt his cabin was not just a shelter, but a home. Yet deep inside, he knew this peace was fragile one. Night, when he returned from gathering wood, he found the older girl standing at the window, staring into the snowy darkness. Her face was serious, her eyes sharp. When he asked what she was looking at, she turned and whispered only one word: hunters. Then she pulled the blanket tighter around her sister and said no more. The man lay awake long after they had fallen asleep, the crackling of the fire did little to calm his thoughts. Hunters, she had said. That single word carried danger. It meant someone was after them. Someone powerful enough to scare even these strange, glowing-eyed children. He knew then that his choice to let them stay might cost him more than he ever expected. But when he looked at their sleeping faces, peaceful and innocent, he also knew there was no going back. They were no longer just strangers, no longer just two lost souls at his door. They were his responsibility now. And in the frozen silence of the night, as the storm raged outside, the old man made a quiet promise to himself. Whatever hunted them, whatever shadows they had escaped, it would not touch them here, not while he still drew breath. The strangers had stayed, and with them, a new chapter of his life had begun. A chapter filled with mystery, danger, and perhaps fate. The night was cold, colder than most nights he had seen in years. The wind howled through the cracks of the small cabin, carrying with it the icy breath of the frozen wasteland outside. Inside, the fire burned low, casting long shadows against the wooden walls. The old man, weathered and gray, sat by the table, eating his simple meal of bread and thin soup, alone as always. Life had been quiet like this for many years. It was a lonely life, but at least it was safe. Then came the sound, a soft knock. Weak, almost drowned by the wind. At first he thought it was just the storm beating against the door, but then it came again, 2 faint knocks. Trembling, desperate, he frowned, rising slowly, and opened the heavy wooden door. Cold air rushed in, and with it came a sight that made him freeze. 2 small figures stood in the snow. They were girls, but not human. Their skin glowed faintly blue, as if moonlight had touched them. Their long silver hair clung wet against their thin faces. Their large eyes, bright, glowing, and filled with fear, looked up at him, as if begging for mercy. They were shivering, their small hands clutching each other, their clothes torn and thin against the brutal cold. They looked half-starved, their lips pale, their steps weak. They had been wandering for too long, and he could see that one more night in the cold might take their lives. For a moment, he hesitated. They were alien, strangers, and he had learned long ago that kindness could bring danger. The world outside was cruel, and nothing was ever given for free. But then he saw the younger girl stumble, her knees shaking, and the other one trying to hold her up with trembling arms. Something inside his chest tightened. They were children, hungry and helpless, and no man with a heart could turn them away. "Come in," he said at last, his voice rough. The girls looked at each other, then stepped inside, their small feet leaving trails of melting snow on the floor. He shut the door quickly, locking the cold away. For a moment they stood there silently, their breaths coming in sharp gasps, staring at the warmth of the fire as if they had stepped into another world. He placed 2 bowls of soup on the table, the same thin broth he had been eating. The girls hesitated, looking at him with wide eyes. "Eat," he told them, pushing the bowls forward. They glanced at each other again, then reached for the spoons, their hands shaking. The first taste made their eyes widen, and soon they were eating quickly, almost too quickly, as if afraid the food might vanish. The man sat back watching them, something heavy stirring in his chest. It had been many years since anyone had shared his table, and seeing these 2 frail creatures devour the meal made him realize how empty his life had been. When the bowls were empty, he gave them bread. They tore it apart, eating until at last their trembling slowed, their faces softening. For the first time, he saw faint smiles, weak but real. The cabin no longer felt so empty. He leaned back, staring at the flames, wondering who these children were and where they had come from. Their silver hair and glowing eyes told him they were not like any humans he had ever known. But their hunger, their fear, their fragile hope, those things were the same as his own. "Rest," he said, pointing to a blanket in the corner. The girls obeyed, curling together beneath it, their small bodies pressed close for warmth. Soon, their breathing slowed and they slept. The man watched them for a long time, his rough hands resting on the table, his thoughts heavy. He did not know what tomorrow would bring, or if danger would follow them here. But tonight, on this cold and lonely night, he had opened his door and shared his fire, and deep inside, though he would not admit it yet, he knew his life would never be the same again. Outside, the wind screamed across the wasteland, but inside the cabin, for the first time in years, there was more than silence. There was life, fragile and uncertain, but alive, and as the fire crackled, the old man sat in the shadows, wondering what fate he had invited when he chose kindness over fear.